Extraordinary stories on Sky Documentaries. Powered by Jaguar.
"70 years ago, something special started. Formula One. Man and machine in perfect unison. Pushing each other to their limits. Supported by teams aiming for that top step.
The name of the game is winning.
Seeking perfection. The road hasn't always been smooth. We've marveled at great moments. Had smiles brought to our faces. Cried with our heroes. Witnessed incredible bravery and terrible sadness. Moments never to be forgotten. For 70 years, this has been their Everest. This is what makes them special. This is the story of Formula One.
From Italy, we have the Alfa team, almost certain winners, indisputable post-war champions of motor racing, and in the hands of some of Europe's finest drivers, they have swept home to victory after victory.
All the 50s cars, the Alfas and Maseratis of that period were iconic for me. And just the shape, I mean, we all had an Alfetta dinky toy, and I just loved the cars from that era.
Those early cars, they had no comprehension of aerodynamics, so they were very much mechanical devices. And some strange rules. I mean, they had, we have a minimum weight limit. They had a maximum weight limit, which seems crazy.
The people that drew those cars, the draftsmen, if you like, that drew those cars, had a real empathy for shape. You know, the grills weren't just openings with some mesh in them. The grills were always interesting, you know, and they fitted the rest of the car. And the shape of the tail didn't really have to be like that from an aerodynamic point of view. So I find that period fascinating.
I often think with Italian Grand Prix cars, they all have a bit of an owing to Bernini, the sculptor. Something about Italian Grand Prix cars, they always they look different, and they are different. They are works of art in themselves.
There is colour everywhere as the cars stand wheel to wheel awaiting the warming up lap. The red of Italy, blue of France, yellow of Belgium, green of Britain, yes, they all blend beneath the fluttering flags of competing nations to give an air of pageantry unequalled in any sport. Having made the fastest time in practice, the Alfa drivers were all in the front line.
It's a remarkable bit of kit. It ended up getting 420 horsepower out of 1.5 litres, and there was nothing that would stop it.
Watch the driver's techniques and observe the obviously superior road holding and acceleration of the Alfa cars as they four-wheel drift round this corner.
Now, Farina seemed to have the knack of driving the car, the Alfetta, quite smoothly.
The race was a walkaway for the Alfa Romeos. Farina, number 2, was first, followed home by Fagioli, number 3. The winner's average speed was 90.95 miles an hour. A very fine driving feat, well worthy of the laurels. His English also rose to the occasion.
I am very glad to have won the Grand Prix.
The Alfetta took a whole nation's hopes after World War II to the fruition of 2 world championships in the same car by development and research.
Fangio, destined to become the 1951 champion driver of Europe, refreshes himself with a well-earned drink.
Because there were no challengers to the Alfetta as a 159, they decided for 1952 that championship, world championship, will be run for Formula 2 cars. The car was Ferrari 500, i.e. 500cc per cylinder, four-cylinder engine, 2 litres, Formula 2 car. And Ferrari was really in his element there because that little four-cylinder engine of his was completely bulletproof. And he had Alberto Ascari, the late Antonio Ascari's son, and the man just flew brilliantly in his Ferrari 500. In fact, I think he won 9 Grand Prix on the trot.
And to Alberto Ascari, a further Grand Prix victory. A victory which was to confirm him champion of the world a second time.
My inspiration was definitely Alberto Ascari, speaking even to you know, the last couple of years, you know, as late as a few years ago, even to Sterling, I was saying, going back, and he knows, you know, that how, you know, how important they've been, you know, to my formative years.
It was a duel all the way between Ferraris and Maseratis, but Alberto Ascari, number 5, the 34-year-old Italian and world's champion driver, took the lead and held it in a Ferrari. A terrific performance by a great driver.
There is a magical thing about Ferrari. Ask any amateur racer in the world if they'd like to go and race a Ferrari somewhere, and the answer is immediately yes. There's something about Ferrari. It's probably the best brand name in the world, must be in the top 3, surely.
From Germany reborn, the Mercedes-Benz re-enter to continue the legend they wrote before the war.
I think the beauty of Mercedes is that they only get into all this motor racing when they feel that they've got a product that can win. They don't go there to come second or third if they can help it. They like winning. And that is really the only way you can think about motor racing. That 196 was a really beautifully thought out car. Straight 8-cylinder engine, which makes the most beautiful noise, canted over to keep it nice and low on the whole profile of the car. Mercedes had always been a force to be reckoned with in whatever they did. Still are today, of course. They chose Juan Manuel Fangio to be their number 1 driver, and the youngster, Sterling.
I joined Mercedes, which was a fantastic, I mean, incredible. Anything you wanted, they do. I mean, if you want slightly higher geared steering, they'd do it. If you wanted this, if you want to mirror up, they'd do anything you like.
Entry. The RAC Grand Prix in the hands of the British Automobile Racing Club. There are 6 British cars in the entry. But as this is a World Championship event, the Germans are here as well. So who is for the lead? Moss distinctly hesitated to let Fangio past, but the Argentine would have none of it, and Sterling won his first Grand Prix, his own Grand Prix, the ambition of a brilliant lifetime.
Sterling knew from the outset he was never going to have a better teacher, a better professor than Fangio, and he was just going to learn so much from him, not least just by simply following him. They did have a lot of 1-2s in '55.
Over 300 miles of superlative driving behind them, the Mercedes pair press on to victory.
Fangio was a fantastic man. He was a lovely man anyway, and he would never, ever go off. I mean, if you followed Jack Brabham, for instance, he'd go over the gravel and you get all the crap over you. See, Fangio wouldn't do that. He'd let me sit there, and we were known as a train. And Neubauer came up to me one day, he said, you know, I don't like this idea. He said, what happens if Fangio goes off? I said, well, Fangio does not go off.
At Monza 2, Fangio wins, and with it, his second World Championship title.
There was no doubt that he was the best driver of the 50s, and when you start talking about all time, you cannot compare what we had to put up with, the challenges we had in the 50s compared with today. I mean, in our time, the first component, your first competitor was in fact the circuit. If you spun the car, you know, you are immediately in the lap of the gods, because whether you finished up against a tree or a curb or a a brick wall would be out of your hands.
Flames reach up in the sky at Abbey Curve, where Brooks BRM was overturned, throwing its driver clear.
Fangio went into the lead to finish magnificently at an average of 98.65.
Well, the Lancia D50 was a very brave program that Lancia instigated. It's a V8 2.5-litre engine, and the Ferrari version of that car, the D50A, was a very well-sorted car. I've raced one of those. It's a beauty. It's a really, really lovely machine, and I raced it at Goodwood 2 or 3 times.
In 1956, Fangio demonstrates his mastery of a young man's sport. There seemed to be no way to stop Fangio winning motor races, but out in Cuba, not even being kidnapped and held until too late to race disturbed the calm serenity of Fangio, now champion driver of the world for the 4th time.
People talk about the Lotus 49 was the first car to use the stress engine, blah, blah, blah. But as we know, it wasn't, because the D50 Lancia got there first. And for me, that's the clever car.
I drove the early one, which just has 2 exhaust pipes coming out of 4 cylinders each side. But the later car, the Ferrari version, those 4 pipes went into 2 pipes with megaphones. I had to put in 2 earplugs and push them until they met in the middle to try and do something about it. It's a great joy to drive those cars today in more or less the same setup that they had when they were new. I sat in that Lancia D50A and I thought, wow, this is exactly how Fangio had it. The engine and the gearbox had come out of Ferrari's junkyard down at Maranello. They found about 5 engines and I think 6 or 7 gearboxes. And they were going to be sold to the scrap man. This was the most extraordinary thing of all. Scrap man was coming that afternoon to take them all away.
In my opinion, if Lancia had had the financial resource that Mercedes had in 1954, nobody would have seen where that thing went. It would have been gone.
Fangio in 2nd place is guaranteed the World Championship for the 4th time. But this was Moss's finest hour in a season's magnificent motor racing.
Well, I've been racing quite a bit, and what I wanted to do was to find an English car, and there hadn't been an English car at all.
Nobody thought, or a lot of people didn't think it was even possible, that there was such an Italian stranglehold on Formula One success. And of course you had Mercedes-Benz in there as well. That these people simply couldn't be beaten by a British car. Tony van der Velde was a very aggressive guy, and his one abiding ambition, as he would put it, was to beat those bloody red cars.
The Van Walls, resplendent in their British racing green, are manoeuvred into their positions comfortingly near the front of the red machines from Italy.
When you look at the Van Wall team, what you could say is it grew out of Tony van der Velde's impatience with the way the BRM project was going.
And so he said, right, if they won't do it in the way I believe, I'll do it myself. I'm going to build a car, I'm going to do this, so I rather like that.
By 1956, he employed this upcoming guy to do the chassis called Colin Chapman, who would have quite a stellar career subsequently, and Frank Costin to look after the aerodynamics.
It was Colin then that suggested that they should speak to Frank and see if Frank would do an aerodynamic body for him. And of course, the Van Wall looked anything but like any other Formula One car.
Costin and Chapman worked together to put the Norton engine that Van der Velde had created into this super streamlined car, which we have an example of behind. It was a beautiful car, completely redefined the way that the cars of the time looked. So by 1957, Stirling was part of the lineup together with Tony Brooks and an brilliant upcoming young driver called Stuart Lewis Evans. They complemented each other very, very well.
It was only 3 weeks after I'd had my accident at Le Mans, where I'd finished up trapped underneath the Aston Martin, and I was less than fit, and it was clear that I wouldn't have the stamina to maintain a high enough speed to actually win the race. So I agreed before the race that if anything happened to Sterling's car or Stewart's car, that I would bring mine in and they would take it over.
Moss makes a hurried stop at his pits, confirming our worst fears. It's no good. The Van Walls are not finished yet. And as Tony Brooks goes past, the signal is out for him to come in and hand over to Sterling.
And he came in, we changed over, and I think it was pretty painful actually for him.
Brooks can't leap out. Tired and sore, he has to be helped gingerly from the cockpit. Then in a flash, Moss is off. No longer leading, but in 9th place, with a long, hard road of over 60 laps ahead of him. Increasing his speed lap by lap, he moves up through the field.
I took over the car and managed to win, so it was a wonderful thing for our team and for Tony and myself.
And Sterling takes it to herald the first all-British triumph in a Grand Épreuve since Seagrave in 1924.
Van der Velde proved that with the right technology, and that was the key thing, the right technology, the right engine, the right drivers, the right tyres, not only could British cars be competitive, but finally they proved they could be reliable and quick enough to win races. So it was a major breakthrough.
Well, there's a lot of wishful thinking about, and quite a few people who should know better are saying, 1, 2, 3, Van Wall, old man, that's what it'll be.
By 1958, again with the same 3 drivers, they were perfectly poised to challenge for the World Championship. And in 1958 as well, very important, that was the first year in which there was a World Championship for constructors.
Moss, number 1, produced all his verve and sparkling skill, breaking the lap record and driving the outstanding British Van Wall to a handsome first place.
The Van Wall won the title, therefore one can't knock it because overall it was great. But it was really a difficult car to drive, it had a very difficult gearbox. It was stable, but it didn't have the ease of driving. It wasn't a friendly car.
You know, going quickly in those cars would be, was a very stirring experience anyway, because of the whole sensation of the car. I mean, the engines were not that smooth, and the suspension was not that smooth. So you had the whole situation of noise adds to your sensation of speed. It was a wonderful experience. Of course, we were absolutely delighted that that we were able to win the championship. Sterling and I won 3 Grand Prix each, which sort of fairly evened out the contribution that we'd each made to the success of the team.
Brooks is in command, and Mr. Van der Velde is with him all the way.
And of course, what was most important was that Tony Van der Velde was very pleased because he'd spent a fortune on motor racing, producing so many Van Walls before he came up with the one which was good enough in '58 to win the Grand Prix.
If you look at the Van Wall legacy, that legacy is to have broken the stranglehold that the Italians and the Germans had on Formula One, and to prove that the British not only could field competitive cars that raced honourably, but that actually were successful and won that title fair and square.
Congratulations to Tony Van der Velde, whose enthusiasm and money has made this victory possible after so many heartbreaks and near misses, which would have deterred lesser men.
If you've got this list, you've got Van Wall and then you've got Cooper, because Cooper were sort of next in line.
John and Charles Cooper took hold of a Fiat Topolino, removed the front and the rear suspension, grafted them onto a very simple but fairly rigid space frame, have a single-cylinder JA Prestwich motorcycle 500cc engine in the back, and anybody that was capable of fitting into this could drive it.
Almost by happenstance, they put the engine in the back. A lot of people thought that was because of the success of the Auto Union before the war. It was more a matter of if you put the engine at the back, you could drive it by chain on the rear axle, therefore you didn't need a gearbox. Very clever and absolutely typical of the pragmatic engineering approach that Charles and John brought to their production of their cars. And I think it's fair to say the Cooper 500cc cars They brought affordable motor racing to the masses, if you like, after the Second World War. And they had some luminaries of the future driving them, such as Ken Tyrrell and Bernie Ecclestone, and also a very quick upcoming guy called Sterling Moss. Gradually, they began to evolve. You know, they figured out that putting the engine behind the driver had a lot of advantages in terms of lightness, weight distribution, handling balance. They began with smaller Coventry Climax engines and gradually got bigger and bigger to the point where they could have a 1.9 litre and actually do a little Formula One car.
And then, the most extraordinary thing, 1958, so Cooper Type 43 is entered by Rob Walker into the Argentine Grand Prix.
Rob Walker was my patron, and it meant he supplied the car and everything else, and I supplied the talent to drive it, and so it was a wonderful team.
And he wins the Argentine Grand Prix in a rear-engine car. And everybody kind of looked at everybody else and thought, maybe there's more to this rear-engine thing than we see.
I went to see the Cooper Car Company when I got to England, and luckily I went very well with John Cooper, and finished up driving for him and working for him, and it was a great era.
Number 3 was the winner, the Cooper driven by Jack Brabham. A mighty good omen for British cars this season.
It was really in 1959 with Jack Brabham where they really began to strike it. Jack won that year's title, so they won both the World Championship for drivers, first time for an Australian, and the World Championship for constructors, the second year in a row that a British constructor had won.
He was there at the very kind of beginning, in a sense, of when they started to move towards being real competitors in Formula One. And, you know, Dad was in the workshop, he would build the car.
Well, our big problem in those days, of course, when we first started, there was no gearboxes for rear-engine cars. So we had to make our own.
They did a jolly good sort of blacksmith's job and built this car. And it really, it was very, very easy to drive. It really was. I mean, it, with no vices.
You could go along and drive a Cooper and you'd have the back hanging out, which is the last thing you'd be doing with a Lotus. So they did a very good job.
What they did was to show the world that the rear-engine car was the way to go, and they killed the front-engine Formula One car. That was pretty much a dead duck from 1960 onwards.
There's a signature for some lucky autograph hunter who gets a world champion for his collection.
I like the idea myself, and I certainly helped a lot with the development of it, and it just become a success story, and the fact that everybody's got a rear-engine car now, it must have been the right idea.
It's amazing to see that a small outfit, and they really were. I mean, there was Ginger Devlin, I mean, about 3 mechanics down there, John and Charles, you know, could build a car that was actually going to get the World Championship.
Very crucially, they carried on what Tony Vandervelde had started, British engineering talent that we take for granted almost today in so many areas of Formula One. That is where it really was consolidated by Charles and John Cooper.
Another name that Britain may be proud of, and the man who made it so, John Cooper. From 500cc racing for fun to the Formula One World Championship, the Cooper team has always embodied the finest spirit of British racing.
The variety of cars was enormous. You know, type of cars, and particularly engines. Engines were a very strong aspect back then, and all sorts of configurations. And so, yeah, they were pretty brave guys as well that drove them.
We had enormous pleasure. We had enormous upsets. We had bad times and good times. It was a pretty good life, I can tell you. I can't think of any other life that would compare, actually.
Extraordinary stories
on Sky Documentaries. Powered by Jaguar.
For Rolex and motorsport,
And away we go!
it began in 1935,
Bluebird is burning up Daytona again.
championing the legendary races from Le Mans to Melbourne and the drivers who test the limits. Continuing to move motorsport ahead.
At Wilko, we're all about the little wins. Like picking the perfect paint, at last. Or all the essentials for the big move. Wilko can even help you store things in style. And we can try to help you win at DIY. Well, you can't win at everything. Wilko. Lots of little wins.
Imagine the places we'll go. Together. Expedia.
شكرك لكم شديدا أنا كنا تعبانين شديد بكلامهم هاي ده كله كنا تعبانين شديد سنين ده كله نرجعكم مرقوم ده بعيد طبعا.
British beef topside, prepared by our butchers fresh in store. Half price at £6 per kilo. Morrison's, making it fresh.
Shall I tell you a story? It's the story of an orphan girl who was sent to live in a mysterious house.
Don't expect luxury. Misselthwaite is not the place it was.
And what if I were to tell you she discovered something magical? Something secret.
Brent. Follow me!
I knew you were hiding something.
This garden, it's capable of extraordinary things. Now will you believe in the magic?
Get ready, because there's so much to look forward to on Sky Cinema.
Who wants to have some real fun?
Me.
See that right there?
I like it.
With all this and more, there's so much to look forward to with Sky Cinema.
Tonight you're who I really want to be. All you have to do is connect.
Everyone's happy here. This place is so perfect. Why is it upside down?
I think I recognize things here, like I've been here.
There were some photos posted online. It's not me. My fingerprints are all over that house.
How many times have I said to you, gloves and a gun if you want to have fun?
Remember me. You wouldn't believe what these people are capable of. This what you want? Well, have it all! Take it from me.
In the 50s, it was all about engine and driver. Tyres, everybody had the same sort of tyres. They had very crude suspension, brakes that were awful, and the chassis were so crude. Then you go into the 60s, and suddenly the chassis was everything in the 60s. Absolutely, chassis and driver. And in the 70s, aero arrives. Suddenly, aerodynamics becomes important. So it varies, you know, and it's still varying, and it's almost decade. You can actually see the emphasis change.
The MP44 was very much a sort of committee car, which was primarily conceived by Steve Nichols, Alan Jenkins, and supplemented by some of Gordon Murray's thinking. But I don't think anyone could claim to be the exclusive designer of that car.
The drivers, they'd think, it's my car, you know, I drive it. And Ron would think, it's my car, I own it, you know, and the designers think, it's my car, I designed it. And the mechanics think, it's my car, I screwed it together, you know.
Ron Dennis was the very first of the team owners, team managers to decide or to see the importance of a good designer.
My attitude towards things is always trying to just make the best possible car. Use the brain power available, use the rules, use all your resources and components to just make the best possible car. And so the starting point really was to talk to the drivers. They were our sensors on the car to really know what was happening and to really know what was needed. So I talked to the drivers and asked them, what do you need to go faster? What's slowing you down? And they came up with several factors. I outlined maybe 7 factors that they had mentioned and tried to address each one of those factors to make things a little better. For example, they thought the car rolled a little bit too much, so we raised the roll center slightly to reduce the roll. They didn't think the front felt completely connected to the rear, and some of the settings would sort of get lost on their way from the front to the rear. And so we made the monocoque much more stiff, which helped that problem.
I had just come from Brabham, where I could see the benefit of lowering the frontal area and the driver at about a 40 degree, I think it was, back angle, or 35 degrees, I think maybe even. In the wind tunnel, I think it was 7% more efficient, which is unheard of, even at those days, on lift over drag. And I could see it was a massive advantage. I sat down with Steve and Neil and put the drawings on the table and just said, that's where we're going, basically. It took some getting used to, because your head was cranked up. Your body was down and your head was cranked up. Prost didn't like it. He asked to be sat up. So we built him a foam wedge and we sat him up. And then he was 200 revs slower than Ayrton in the straight because his helmet was blocking the airbox. So he lay down again.
I had also a big problem with the comfort in the car, a lot of air coming in the cockpit, a lot of problems with my seat, a lot of problems with the pedals. I tried to make a big effort, so I spent a lot of time with the mechanics, quite late in the evening for the last 3 days, and at the end, today the car was, I would say 90% the way I like, and it was much, much quicker, much better.
So the net result of that, as it turned out, was a car that was just very, very good in every department. It just had no vices, really. You know, it wasn't like it was a 9 out of 10 in 8 categories and then only 2 out of 10 in 1 category. It was 9, 9.5, something like that in every category. So the big secret of the MP44 was that there wasn't any secret. It was just very good in every respect.
Anything that gave somebody an advantage, Ayrton never complained.
I remember him saying to me that he'd been working out in Brazil, and I said to him, "Yeah, that's nice, but maybe you could stop now because you're getting a little too big for the car." Inevitably, by today's standards, the car looks quite simple, but in period, it was you know, right up to date. I wanted everything to be technically correct, but I kind of wanted it to look nice as well. We tried to make it flow, so to speak. Like if you look at the nose of the car, there's sort of two little shapes, and the top blister or bubble goes back into the windscreen, and then on purpose flows back into the headrest behind the driver. You know, that line flows through. And I mean, above all, you want the car to be quick. No compromise there. But if it's going to look simple and clean and elegant, I quite like understated elegance, I suppose. Total technical staff at McLaren was 17 people, and we had to do a hell of a lot of work there. I remember one of the great guys working on the design team, Hughie Moran, he said he was driving past the factory one night at 1 o'clock in the morning, and my light was still on. So, you know, it was a very intense period, but ultimately very rewarding.
At one point, I remember the head of production came and said, "We're not going to make the Imola test." And I said, "Why?" And da-da-da. I said, "What about this? What about that?" No, we can't. And I put on a white coat. I went down to the build shop and I said, I will participate in building it. Within 5 hours, they were saying, "Go back to your office, you know, we've got the message." And it was a very interesting day that went down in the history of McLaren, you know, that I sort of said, right, you think, you know, if you don't think the car's going to get there, I do, and this is what we have to do.
He did a very good job of selling the car to Honda.
This is really the result of many, many meetings. Obviously, a more intense set of meetings over the last few months, and we're very, very happy to be in this partnership because we feel that their views and their strategy is very consistent with our own, which is to go to every race with the intention of winning it.
The team went into a different dimension, and especially with Honda and with Ayrton, it was a different attitude of inside the team.
I think it's great potential in there with the new combination, especially. The team has great achievements in the past and has everything even to be better in the future. Therefore, I feel very confident about it.
Honda are very strong today. I think they're going to be strong not only next year, but all the years that they remain in Formula One. And obviously, we're going to have to do a very good job for them with the car, as we hope they'll do with the engine for us.
I remember arriving late at night in the hotel in Imola, and there was some high-level official from Honda there, and he said to me in the lobby, "So tomorrow we find out about your wonder car." And I thought, what's wrong? What's he been selling here? You know, so he'd been giving them a big sales pitch, I guess, to get Honda and to get Senna on board.
Of course, we arrived late, and all of the teams pretty much, and certainly Ferrari, had been testing 2 days, and therefore was set a lap time.
Inevitably, I was nervous. The car had been done by a limited number of people in a limited amount of time, starting really in August when we signed the contract with Honda, and now it was ready to run early in 1988.
Prost drove the car first, and on his first flying lap, he was half a second off the fastest time that Ferrari had set over the 2 days. On the second flying lap, he'd equalled it.
I said, that's a winning car. That's a winning car, for sure. I knew Imola very well. I knew how it was, no problem. I was very happy.
In the afternoon, we put Senna in the car. He went faster still. He did his first run, 5 laps or so, came in, and he just sat there in the car, stunned, really. Didn't say anything for maybe 30 seconds, seemed like 5 minutes. And then he said, "This car is going to be blankety-blank quick."
By the end of the test, we were, 1.5 seconds quicker than anybody else.
Prost was saying to her, "Look, we got to keep a lid on this, you know, we don't want to let everybody know how good the car is," but the cat was out of the bag, so to speak. It was fantastic, really. I mean, you've got the legendary Senna in this car, and he reckons it's brilliant. You've got Prost saying, we're going to win the World Championship with this car. It was just the most amazing thing.
So, of course, we get to the first Grand Prix. Most teams, either by necessity or belief, decided to go for normally aspirated cars, whereas Ferrari and ourselves stayed with turbocharged cars. To try and create equivalence, we were restricted on fuel tank capacity, and we win the race.
The Brazilian Grand Prix, the first Grand Prix of 1988, has been won by the brilliant Alain Prost in the brand new McLaren MP4/4.
And immediately we are protested. In fact, we were protested every single race. To tune accurately the fuel tank capacity, we had nylon balls to make absolutely sure that the tank capacity was correct. So it became quite ritualistic at the end of Grand Prix. Charlie would come and said, I've got to count your balls. And we would systematically drain the car down, meticulously count out the balls, look around inside the fuel tank, put the same number of balls in, fill it up, and establish that the car was legal. And this happened right through the season.
McLaren and Ron was the first to insist that there is no deal between the drivers. They are ready, willing, able to race. They both have 2 drops of water. The cars were absolutely identical.
To win against Ayrton, it's quite difficult because you have to make a good start, you have to push hard, you have to stay concentrated, you have to push until the end because you never give up, and that's part of the job, but it's quite difficult. And racing like this every Sunday, it's going to be very tiring.
For Ayrton, Alain was the one that he wanted to beat him. When we started driving and testing with him, he was not interested in Piquet or Mansell, just Prost. What rear wing Prost had? What's the angle of this? What is the pressure he used on the tire? Everything that Alain was doing, he wanted to do it.
They weren't radically different in their setups. Perhaps quite different in their driving technique, but their setups weren't that far off. And if they didn't get close to the same setup, they were nervous about that, and they wondered why. You know, they'd be more comfortable if they were approaching the same setup, and they'd then know that the other one didn't have some significant advantage over them.
It's been good for both of us this year, and the car has been good. He has more points, I don't have, but still a lot of race to come.
I think it doesn't need to learn anything, especially on being quick in qualifying.
As long as we are in front, we don't really bother about the others.
And so the people went to see a race, knew that McLaren was going to win, but they didn't know who was going to win, and they were going to be able to watch the best 2 drivers of the world battling each other on the equally identical cars.
When we got to Monza, 2 things happened.
Alain Prost sadly retiring from the Italian Grand Prix. Spin! Senna! Ayrton Senna spins! What a fantastic situation!
And that's all over for Ayrton Senna.
His impatience, he could not wait. You know, he gets behind somebody like with Schlesser. He was just about to double him. Schlesser, when you saw him in the mirror, he kind of made a mistake. He braked too late, he got in the chicane, he spun, and he went out and collected Senna on the back. He couldn't pass him there. He should have waited in the straight, he passed it again. But he couldn't. As soon as he find people, he passed them all the time.
We lost that race, and of course at the time, we didn't realise that we were going to win all the subsequent races, and that was the only one we wouldn't win.
When he did make a mistake, he punished himself so much that not even Ron could tell him off.
Ayrton Senna stalled and virtually stopped.
We didn't have a good start, and he's sort of buried. And then, you know, one by one, picking them off and coming back through the field and winning that championship.
Trying to recover the lost ground, but I didn't think I could make up the whole lost ground to catch Alain.
I was 12 seconds ahead of Ayrton, and then I lost almost everything in 2 laps. It auto turn in this condition is a little bit quicker, and that's it. I mean, this have to be world champion to win this race and to be world champion.
I'd like to thank McLaren Honda for giving me this year, for the first time in my career, a real opportunity to win a championship. It's been great.
I was very fortunate to have been allowed to design that car. And then the following year to be able to be Senna's race engineer and engineer him to his first world championship. So you design the car and then you go race the car and you develop the car and you win the world championship with a legend like Senna, you know, I don't know. For a race car designer, I don't think it can get any better than that.
Yeah, I often think great racing cars are inspiration of an individual and the group of people which are around them, and the drivers. And the MP4 was an era of McLaren where they had some great people there, a great structure. Ron was incredibly dynamic and motivated, brilliant drivers. And they managed to make all that chemistry work, and the cars that came out of McLaren in the main in that era were exceptional.
The MP44 went on to win 15 out of 16 races, 15 out of 16 pole positions, 10 1-2s through the season. So the success of the car was phenomenal.
So I look back on it, I've enjoyed every minute, and I really, of course, enjoyed the period of domination that the MP44 gave us.
Extraordinary Stories on Sky Documentaries, powered by Jaguar.
I think conversation of sustainability is going to continue to grow, so it's important that we act and do as much as we can.
As the Mercedes Petronas Formula One team, we want to lead the charge.
Petronas has been on its sustainability journey for more than 2 decades.
It's great to see Petronas so heavily involved in setting up projects in which they can have real impact to the environment.
Our business transformation plan is to shift our operation from grey to blue production with carbon capture and ultimately to green production with zero carbon.
We see motorsports as a platform to demonstrate our concept and ideas. We want to make petrochemicals, we want to make refining products, we want to make base oil solutions which have sustainable options.
We will continue to integrate sustainable development to drive us even further in our aspiration to become a progressive energy and solutions partner, enriching lives for a sustainable future.
I know what you're thinking. Do a bank or reject it.
Bank it.
I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to.
Would you like to enjoy an online casino experience? Discover Big Banker with premium graphics and exclusive game features. Play with passion at Coral Casino.
Get up to half price on many sofas at DFS. And for a limited time, enjoy extra savings on selected ranges, like the Art Recliner, now just £579. Available with 4 years interest-free credit with nothing to pay for a year. But hurry, extra savings on these sofas end Monday. DFS.
So these are people that tried to kill us?
Yep.
Because of what you know?
Yeah. We kill everyone on the list.
Yeah.
Do you really think they come back?
I know, Jack. This is unfinished business.
This is about absolution. It's about righting a wrong so great that they will kill to right it.
Oi!
You used to be fun.
I'm still fun.
What do you do for work?
I'm working with my parents.
I'm your business.
You could say that.
Remember what your mum said? Act normal. That's why I love her.
Why don't you just let it go? Just stop before anyone else gets hurt.
I'm coming for you. And there's nothing you can do about it.
Back on top, the pride of the Premier League. Oh, what a goal! This is unbelievable!
I think I recognize things here, like I've been here.
It's the most lethal Terminator ever created.
If we don't win this one, it's all over.
Sierra, I'm going to help you change the future.
Bolder, brighter, better TV with Ultra HD. All in one place. Easy. Sky Q.
In a year like no other, photographer Rankin asks, what did your 2020 look like?
Actually looks good.
A brand new series.
Scream, scream, scream.
Showcasing emotive images.
Anyone can take a great photo.
Captured and sent in by you. Using your 2020 vision.
Right, mate.
Rankin's 2020 starts Tuesday at 8 on Sky Arts.
It was quite clear that we were not going to be serious competitors to Alain Prost, Ayrton Senna with a Honda engine in the McLaren, and we deliberately decided to focus on technology.
The history of active suspension at Williams started before my time, so really it was Frank Durney who was the champion of that project from the start.
My objective with Active was to just keep the aero platform stable. People thought if the bottom was flat, there wouldn't be any ground effect. But in actual fact, with a flat bottom, you just get ground effect, which is massively variant depending on the height above the ground.
There's certainly a lot of conditions in a Formula One car where you cannot get the suspension ideal for all of them, and active suspension is definitely the thing to achieve that.
Frank came to add, I think, some more flair really to the company, someone whose role it was to think about the car and how it developed and the design of the car.
Patrick at first thought it probably, from what we'd seen, wasn't worth doing. But then we had a chap came along who worked for, Lucas, I think, had made a system for an ambulance, the idea being to make the ambulance more comfortable and what have you. And Patrick thought that might have some potential, and so he gave it to me, and we made a prototype which ran an FW09.
We developed ours from an automotive product system that was developed 15 years or so ago, and took one basic idea from that and developed it. And so our system is probably more hydraulic and less electronic.
Frank Durney employed me for the active suspension project. They realised they needed more effort, more expertise. They actually raced a system for one race towards the end of '87, I think, Monza.
We did about 4,500 kilometers, from the beginning of the project to now, and I think I done most of these kilometers, and now everything's going all right.
The car had blistered tyres, the whole bit. He was not going to be giving up. He was going to win that race. And Nigel had not wanted to run the Active because he wasn't at all impressed with the idea of Active. But once we'd won a race with it, he wanted one.
We then did our best for the system we raced in 1988. It really wasn't in the shape it should have been. We really should have taken a year or two before committing to race.
We built it on the FW12 and had all sorts of problems. It was still good, but we couldn't get it working. And I think at Silverstone, Patrick was so frustrated with the whole thing, he just said, right, that's it.
So in our office, that was quite a gloomy day, even though, in all honesty, we realised that it was the right thing and that actually we needed that space to come back with a much better prepared system.
It was also very clear to me that we were not making progress aerodynamically. And then I think at Leighton House, Simon Keeble sacked Adrian Newey. And so I gave Adrian a call and said, why don't you come and join us? And Adrian did. So basically, if you look at the FW14, its external geometry, the body and everything was pure Leighton House from the year before, but with better engineering systems on the car.
There was a huge amount of scepticism as to what were we doing. You know, wasn't this all a bit of a waste of time? I remember late into 1991 where we'd pretty much committed to bringing it to the race car for 92. Still having arguments with race engineers about what was the point and whether it would really make the car quicker.
The active car, at first, it felt a bit weird because it did actually maintain the ride height so well. So, but it didn't feel that different. What you're aware of with a passive car was the amount it rose up at when the load came off. And you just got rid of that problem.
In terms of systems, obviously with the active ride, it had electronic power steering system, and it had at various times anti-lock brakes and various traction control. So it certainly had a lot of systems on it. It was no way, as a car, as complex as the cars are now.
We were playing with really minute ride height control adjustments to front and rear. Attitude control, we had power steering was brought in, we brought in ABS braking, power-assisted braking, to the point where we had a pedal which didn't move at one point, and then we had traction control. I worked on the early traction control and playing with all that stuff. It was great fun.
You've got Adrian Newey tiptoeing down the corridors and Patrick Head, and you think, and Paddy Lowe, and from my position where my office was, I'd often see them all getting together and I'd think, you know, these three guys, I mean, this is going to be a pretty good year for sure.
The greatest moment that I recall was a test at Paul Ricard in December 91, where we had the active car and we also brought along the first version of traction control. And at that particular test, we really did start doing some stunning lap times in an absolute sense.
I think then we felt, wow, you know, it's all about reliability now. It's just about making this car finish.
We needed to win the championship in 92 because we could have done in 91, but didn't.
Etten and I, you know, we had a most incredible race at the end of 91 at Australia when we had the typhoon. And there was cars all down the straight and people having accidents every lap. They red flagged it and abandoned the race. But I actually hit the wall at about 165 on the left-hand side, and it stunned me, and I pulled the car over to the right and just sat there, and it was bucketing down. And I was thinking, that hurt a bit too much. It still hurts a bit too much. I went straight into hospital to have all my foot x-rayed and everything else. And because it was broken, the last two toes were fractured and splintered. Some of the bones were splintered. And they were going to take me straight down to the OR to have it operated on. And I said, look, hang on a minute. I can taste and I can smell and touch a world championship. I'm not going to put myself, you know, on the left field now for 4 months and not have an opportunity going into 92.
In terms of hopes, they're always dampened by the attitude of Frank Williams, whose attitude always is never be overconfident, assume the opposition's going to be bigger and worse than you ever imagined.
Unusually, McLaren, who were the team to beat, they hadn't been to any of the shared team tests. Testing in those days was a fully freestyle process. McLaren had only tested privately, so we didn't know how quick they were going to be.
The car, because of a lot of hard work with many people at Williams, was pretty reliable as well as being quick.
Williams employed the specialists that were needed. They didn't wing it with what they had. They put a team together that were really incredibly methodical. I mean, Patrick was a very methodical engineer. Everything had to be done properly.
Just the general logic of it all and the way they were approaching it, you got this feeling of confidence of what was going to happen if they could make it work. And this time around, probably it would work.
So Kyle Army, the first race, we weren't going in there with a huge... We knew we had a good car, but we didn't know it was a winner. As we went through each session, we were constantly quicker than the McLaren, but I personally thought, well, you know, they're sandbagging. You know, they'll, you know, when it gets to qualifying, they'll suddenly come out and turn it up.
After a thrilling final qualifying session, Nigel Mansell starts in pole position for the 18th time. In fact, he was fastest in every practice session, and his pole lap was 7/10 faster than Senna, who starts alongside Nigel on the front row.
It was a great moment because all that became clear. You know, the story had started to unfold, that here we had an incredibly quick car, and McLaren had nothing to match it.
I'm under no illusion that we are going to win first 4 races like we did last year. I think that will be a lot more difficult this year.
McLaren in those days were like the Romans. You know, you were never going to beat the Romans. And here we had suddenly out-qualified them by a huge margin. I remember standing on the grid with the car, waiting for the race start, and just feeling sort of sick, really, with fear, because I knew all the things that could go wrong. Here was all this stuff we'd invented, but it had never actually been raced. And this was the moment, and there were, you know, hundreds of millions of people watching. And so that could get quite ugly if it all went wrong.
Well, he's done everything right today. No mistakes from Nigel Mansell. A marvellous drive. It's been easy, but he's handled it perfectly professionally. Tremendous win and a great start to 1992.
And Mansell crosses the line, waves to the crowd, and he coasts across by his standards to take the checkered flag before a delighted Frank Williams.
Whatever he did, whether it was snooker, whether it was playing dominoes, he was just a winner in everything he did. He never wanted to be second to anyone. He got the best from that car, and there aren't many drivers on the planet who could have driven a 14B on the limit as consistently as Nigel did, because it was unknown territory. The active car and the grip level and the sort of demands expected of the driver were going into a totally new realm of performance. And Nigel never hesitated, never blinked, just went straight for it and understood it straight away.
They're breaking ranks, the Union Jacks are waving, and Nigel Mansell wins the 1992 British Grand Prix in terrific style. And they're seeing now their hero come through. If he gets back to the pitch through this lot, I think he will be doing extremely well.
I mean, what can you say? I've never experienced that in my whole career anywhere in the world, and I mean, they're fantastic, aren't they? It's just incredible.
It was Silverstone. It was the British Grand Prix, and you know, I'm smiling a lot as I speak because it's difficult to put into words actually what it means to be a part of that.
You know, the most legal drug you can have in the world is adrenaline. And Silverstone for me and the British Grand Prix, no matter where it is, I mean, it's just, I feel like I own it.
3 times he's finished second in the World Championship, but today he could achieve his ambition to be number 1. And that's it. Good start by Mansell on the inside. Patrese is going quicker, but Senna is up into 3rd position ahead of Schumacher. Berger goes round Schumacher up into 3rd position. So already the McLarens are ahead of the man who hopes to win the World Championship here. And that's Mansell up into 3rd place past Gerhard Berger. But in Hungary, the winner is Ayrton Senna, and Mansell finishes, and he's world champion.
To be on the pit wall when that was happening, it was one of the most amazing emotional things I've ever been lucky enough. Amazing emotional things I've ever been lucky enough to do.
Best feeling in the world. I mean, and what Ayrton said to me, and you know, virtually had his arm around me, we were hugging, and then he said some incredible words in my ear, and he felt that he had to say something to me to explain why he was such a difficult person at times. You know, I don't know how many world champions there is, but there's not that many more that have won all the world championships. It's incredible. It's a very select private club.
We are all racers and we love our activity. We take chances, we take risks, we go through pain, we sacrifice lots of things in life just for the pleasure to be P1. So I know what's the feeling like, and I think it's been a long time, long way for him, and he finally got it, and I think I know what's the feeling like.
Mansell wins the Portuguese Grand Prix and a record 9th win in one season.
When I look back in '92, because obviously the day after I got back from Australia that year, and it's there for everybody to see, where did I go? I didn't go for celebration. I went straight into hospital. Had the foot operation and got all the bones out and everything else, and then was on crutches for months and actually went to the prize giving with crutches.
I would say the 14B is the car I look to most as my favourite car. There are some other great candidates, but the 14B obviously very special because I have a personal attachment to the technology within it and to its success. And to working with Nigel for his championship in 1992.
It was a car that just cleaned up. I mean, it was the first actively suspended car to win a championship.
It should be not only considered a great racing car because of how good it was in '92 and the risks, the engineering risks that were taken and the engineering solutions that were made. In that sense, it was a great, great racing car. But also because it was way ahead of its time.
I went back to Williams in 2017 to work, and the first time I saw the 14B again in the workshop, it was on stands in Dickie Stanford's museum workshop, and I hadn't seen this car since 1992, in fact. And just standing there, I burst into tears, so that was completely unplanned and involuntary, and perhaps a bit weak and weedy, but anyway, that shows that I guess it has got a pretty special place in my own history and passion for Formula One.
It's easy to say it was a great Grand Prix car. How good was it in the history of the sport, in the context of the history of the sport? I think it would have to be one of the top 5 Formula One cars of all time.
Extraordinary stories on Sky Documentaries, powered by Jaguar.